Okay, so let's evaluate monopoly as a market structure. With monopoly, the issue really is that it's kind of, are we talking about pure monopolies? Are we talking about working monopolies? What sort of monopoly are we talking about? What are the conditions it operates under? So unlike perhaps perfect competition, monopolistic competition, where it's a bit clearer, here there's a much greater degree of nuance. So if we start where we've often started, with efficiency, the big two are productive and allocative efficiency. And we know that if we take a pure monopoly, just to start with, so one that has 100% market share, what we know, is that it doesn't face any price competition at all. So there is no pressure, unlike in perfect competition, to minimise costs. Therefore, it's highly unlikely that we're going to be productively efficient. So productive efficiency, that's going to be a no. There is no reason for the firm to produce at the minimum points of the average cost curve. And likewise, we also know that the firm has price-setting power. It's a monopoly, especially if we're talking about a pure one. It has price-setting power. It doesn't really need to respond to the needs of the consumer. So there's no need to meet consumer needs particularly. So again, it's not likely to be allocatively efficient. We're not going to get an optimal allocation of resources. So it's not going to be allocatively efficient. We're not going to be where demand equals supply. We're not going to be where average revenue equals marginal cost. Price is going to be well above the level that we'd see in perfect competition, so hence, again, reducing consumer surplus. But if we take what both of those two things mean diagrammatically, then, we can see that the firm's interest really is in maximising its own profits. And this diagram is essentially going to be the same as the one we saw in monopolistic competition. So that's price, cost, revenue, whatever. There's demand, marginal revenue twice as steep. It's a monopoly, so we'll assume it's going to make some abnormal profits. Marginal cost is going to go through the minimum points of the average cost curve. Two-step process. Step 1, we find Q star, where MC equals MR. Step 2, at that output, we find the price and the unit cost. And we can immediately observe two things. Firstly, we can see that unit cost is above. That would have been the productively efficient point. That's the productively efficient output. We can see that costs are above the minimum point of the average cost curve. So that would have been the CPE is the productively efficient cost, and that's your waste per unit. So every unit, every market pen or whatever it is that we're making is costing more of society's scarce resources than it otherwise would have done. That's inefficient. And it's inefficient because the firm doesn't have to minimise costs. It's not perfect competition. It has a degree of market power. But likewise, it's also true that the firm isn't maximising welfare because it doesn't care about welfare, it cares about its own profit. We know that is consumers' willingness to pay. That's the cost of scarce resources needed to make these units. If we were there, welfare would have been maximised. So we would have produced all of the units where consumers' willingness to pay or marginal utility is greater than the cost of the resources. But the monopolist doesn't care about that. Why would they? So they operate at Q star, meaning that sure, there is welfare gained. That area there is welfare gained. But the important point is that welfare is lost. So there is a loss of welfare relative to what could have been gained in a more efficient market structure. Having said that, what we do know is that monopolies, by definition, a pure monopoly particularly, is going to have the whole market. Therefore, there are going to be significant economies of scale. So what that means is that it's possible, and I've shown you this diagram before, but it's possible, especially in the case of something like a natural monopoly, where you're going to get continual economies of scale, because of the very high setup costs. We talked about this elsewhere, where you don't want two sets of train tracks and all that type of stuff. Where having a small firm up here even if it's completely efficient, even if it's productively efficient, it's going to have both a high price and a relatively high cost. Whereas if you take a much bigger firm, like a monopoly in this case, but the same will apply for oligopoly. If you take a much bigger firm, that's kind of operating down here on SRACM for monopoly, even if it was inefficient, suppose it's miles away from the minimum point of the average cost curve, that cost there for the monopoly is far lower than, say, that for perfect competition, or something along those lines. And we can extend this point, just say if it is a natural monopoly again. Suppose we were talking about a natural monopoly here. Obviously, there is that general point that it's inefficient to have more than one firm. That's the whole point about a natural monopoly. And we've made this point elsewhere. You don't want two sets of water pipes, you don't want two sets of train tracks, and so on and so forth. It's just inefficient. So although a monopoly might not be producing at the minimum point of its average cost curve, it might still be more efficient than the alternatives. So maybe there is no single best outcome. When we turn to the other efficiencies, that's allocative and productive. If we turn to dynamic efficiency, then obviously we have we have two tensions that are pulling us in opposite directions. On the one hand, the firm has abnormal profit. Abnormal profits exist in the market structure. Therefore, there is the potential for innovation. Those profits in principle can be reinvested into process, allowing a decrease in costs, or product, allowing an increase in benefits for consumers or something, and a range of new and interesting products produced more cheaply and so on. So on the one hand, we have the potential, but obviously there's no competition. So therefore maybe no innovation, no investment. All that happens is that profits simply are paid as dividends to shareholders, or kept by the owner of the business. So therefore, what we're going to say is, well, kind of it depends then, which is a commonly used phrase. But what does it depend on? So it might depend on, for example, the type of the monopoly. Are we talking about a pure monopoly? Well, there really is no competition. Or actually, are we talking about a working monopoly? One where there's a big firm, but there are other firms competing with it. Under those circumstances, it's more likely to be dynamically efficient because it wants to retain its monopoly position. The same with the idea of contestability. Contestability is something I'm going to come on to a bit later in a different video, but essentially it means, to what extent are there barriers to entry and to exit? Is it, can somebody come in and hit and run in this market? Can they break in and then leave easily if they need to? Again, the greater the extent to which that's true, it'll keep the existing firms honest. They'll have to reinvest their profits and innovate, to protect themselves against the threat of entry, from other firms. You might also think about the role of the regulator. In theory, in theory, we have a water regulator. That is supposed to be insisting that firms reinvest their profits into stopping sewerage from being spilled out into rivers and the sea. They don't seem to be doing a very good job. And you might also think about the firm's origin story. Or its its objectives. So what I mean by origin story, I mean how did it become a monopoly? How did it get monopoly power? So you take firms, you take firms like Amazon and Google, or even something like kind of Instagram. How did they become monopolies? The answer is consumers chose them because they were the best. In the case of Instagram, we talked before about networks and so on, but people chose Amazon because it was the cheapest and the best. People used Google because it was by far. I remember Google coming out as a search engine, and it's just like, my God, actually now a search engine where it delivers interesting and useful results, whereas before that it was all it was all nonsense, really. So they're much more likely to deliver because they're going to want to maintain that position. Their objectives, yeah, sure, they want to make profits, but their objectives are kind of beyond profits and so on. Versus somebody like one of the train companies where they've just bought a license. They bought the right to run a train route. Well, it's just like, well, why would I want to innovate? It's just like it doesn't matter. It's far less important. So all of those things, and this is where monopoly starts to become interesting when you start thinking about the type of monopoly, the conditions under which it's operating. That's what's going to lead to sophisticated responses to questions of this nature. Finally, there's X efficiency or not. Again, the same it depends arguments that we just made here apply there. So X efficiency. I mean, on average, you would think probably not. They're not particularly likely to be X efficient. Because again, in many market structures, there's a lack of competitive pressure. It's likely that you're going to get a build-up of organizational slack. Just unnecessary expenditure. Simply because they don't face competition. Examples of things that I've come across. There's Jeff Bezos is building a 10,000-year clock. The owner of the kind of founder of Amazon. He's building a 10,000-year clock in a mountain somewhere. Or Amazon allegedly has a $40,000 ice bear statue in its lobby. Or I've seen there's a well-known video of Google showing their aquariums that they have in their workplace and their kind of lunch hall in which they serve ostrich steak. Maybe if they faced more competition, they wouldn't do those things, and therefore perhaps that's a sign of inefficiency. But it's debatable. Google would say, well, we need these things to attract and retain top workers and so on and so forth. So interesting efficiency in this case, and it's important to be nuanced when you talk about it.